Okay, here we are, part 2 of this tutorial. So we have our page with our divs, our content, and then the anchor tags which navigate to those various pieces of content. Now the idea is to hide these, or at least only show one at a time, and then have these links selectively show the one that's requested. Now there's a couple things, at least one thing that I'm going to need to do before I get going much further is to I'm going to create a class that I can use to hide these particular divs. So I'll just call it .hide, and it's very simple, display : none. Good. Next, now we need to start with our JavaScript. Okay, so before I hide that, just to make sure that you can understand the structure, this part here is this set of links, and then this chunk here is all of this. Okay, and each div has an ID and has an H3 and a paragraph. Good. Okay, let's get to the JavaScript. Okay, we've done this in the past, init. Just call our function, and then we basically write our function. Function init. Okay, this editor is a little goofy. I'm not really fond of it, but it works enough to kind of do these demos. Okay, the first thing we're going to need to do when the page starts is to hide all of these divs. Actually, we don't want to hide all of them. We just want to hide the last two. We want to keep the first div showing. Okay, so let's start that. In order to do that, we're going to need a reference to this container, and that container is called albums, and we're going to loop through albums and hide the ones that we want. So let's create a variable, call it albums, and that will be equal to document.querySelector, and we're after albums, and that should be pounds. Okay, so that gets me, actually that doesn't get me anything. That would technically only get me actually only get me the whole album. So what I want is albums space, and then I could go with div. Okay, so all the divs, just the divs inside of album. Now this will only return the first one because I've only used query selector. I need to use query selector all to return all of them. Okay, next let's make a loop. That drives me crazy. Okay, there we go. Now we're going to create var I equals 0, and then while I is less than, we'll just say albums dot length. Now in the past you've seen me create a second variable right here. I'm just going to go with that for now. The number of albums is so small that it's not going to be a problem. And then I plus plus. Good. Now if we start our loop at 0, we're going to get all of them. Let's make our code work, and then we can see how we can modify this. Just want you to pay attention to what's going to happen here. Okay, so now we have our loop. Once we've looped through all these, we're going to apply this class onto each one of them. So watch this. We'll do albums, right? Albums I dot class list. Now class list is a property of HTML elements. It's fairly new, but it does work in all the modern browsers. Class list, unlike class name is it treats everything in the class name, so if I had a class here, right, it would treat all of that as one object, one string. So if I change the class name of this div to, let's say, demo, it would blow away all of that, right? So, and if I wanted to change it again using class name, it would blow away this and replace it. So you could see it's difficult to get multiple classes using class name. Class list, though, treats this like an array. So if I had demo and then demo, demi, and blah, 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 it would see that as 3 items and it would treat it like an array. And there is an interface for that. So let's watch how this works. Class list, and then class list has a property called, in our case, we want to add. And the class we want to add is hide. Now what this should do is it's going to grab all the albums, all the divs inside the albums, loop through them, and turn them all off. Let's test it out. Let me fix this before I go any further. Okay, let's run it. Okay, they're all gone. So as soon as the page loads, the JavaScript hides them all. But I don't want to hide them all. I just want to hide 2 and 3. I want the first one to still show up. Now there's a lot of different ways I could do that. I could come here and just select the last 2, not all the divs. So I could do something like div colon nth dash child, and then it'd be something crazy like n plus 2. I'm guessing. Child might not be capitalized. Something like that. Yeah, that works. Right? These we haven't put any functionality on these, so we could do that. If you want to, I would check up and do some research on the nth child CSS attribute. It's really super powerful. It's awesome. But that's kind of a tricky piece of CSS to kind of pull out of your ear. So something a little bit easier would be to just have our loop not loop through all of them, just loop through the last 2, or skip over the first one. So instead of starting my loop at 0, I can start my loop at 1, and it has the same net effect. So it skips over the 0th item, which is this one. This is 1, this is 2. I like that better. My selector's not quite as complex, and this keeps things nice and tidy. Okay, let's give that a comment so we know what this does. Hide all of the albums except first one. Okay, next. The next bit is to turn, let's see. Now the next bit is to add the behaviors onto these links so that when I click it, it will swap this out. So we want to get access to all of these links. Those links are here inside of main. I want all the anchor tags inside of main. So I'm going to do something very similar to this structure up here. Var links is equal to document.queries selector all. And what are we after? We're after all the anchor tags inside of main, so pound main space A. Good. Fix that. You guys are probably yelling at me. Good. Now we're on to exactly the same kind of structure. We want to loop through all those anchor tags. And again, I'm starting here at I, so I'm just going to do var j. Var j is equal to 0. While j is less than links.length. J plus plus. Good. So that should loop through as many items that are in J. We know there's 3. And what we want to do is add the behavior onto these. So it would be links J dot add event listener. And the listener we're listening for is click. And the name of the function we're going to call, well, the function we're going to call is probably something like hide or change album, right? Awesome. Okay, let's create our change album function. Why does it do it for functions but not for loops? I don't know. Okay, so now remember, we're using this function in the context of a listener. So remember, this function always automatically gets passed to it as an argument or a parameter, the event object. So event. Now the reading for this week was chapter 4, which was all about events. So hopefully this will make a little bit more sense. I'll cover that in a moment, in a little bit, in another cast. Okay, a couple more minutes, and then we'll take and break this video here. So let's see. So we have our function. Let's just make sure the first thing we do is to evt.prevent default. So if JavaScript is on, we will make sure that the event doesn't happen, meaning that when I click it, it's not going to scroll the page. It'll just ignore that and just do what the JavaScript tells it to do. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is just make sure it's wired up correctly. Okay, let's go. Okay. Another thing that's probably a little better to alert so that we can try to get ahead of the game here is let's alert this .href, right, using dot syntax. Album 3, album 1. Good. Now, at some point, we're going to need just this, because see how that part looks like, not only does it look like a anchor that'll take me to an item with an ID of album 1, but it's also suspiciously, it looks like a CSS selector for something with an ID of album 1. We're going to need to peel this piece off. We don't want the whole URL. We just want that part right there. So let's see how we can do that. Okay, so instead of that, I'm going to create a variable that's going to keep track of that whole URL. So I'll just say href is equal to evt.target.href. Okay, good. I'll create one more variable because what I want is not the whole href, just the piece of it. So var, and I'll just say, I guess, ID, var ID is equal to href dot split. Now we'll split that on the pound sign, and right after that, that's going to be an array. Split will take the string and break it into an array based on this element as a selector, as a separator. We only have one of those in that URL, so we're going to have the piece before and the piece after. So I want the piece after, 1. Now, all of this will, if I click on this link here, this will evaluate to just the word album. Let's try it. Let's say alert ID. Album 3. Album 2. Good. Now, the trick here is I don't want just that word. I want the pound sign on the beginning of it as well, because I'm going to use that as a way to select this div. So I'm going to have to put that back on there. So I'm going to concatenate the pound sign on the front end of it. Like that. That's what I'm after. Good. Okay, finally. Now that I have, whenever I select one of these things, it's going to tell me which div to display. Right? Now, here, I'm going to do almost exactly the same thing right here. In fact, I can grab this and use it. Because this is going to hide all the albums. But I'm going to change this to 0 so I do actually hide all of the albums. So when I click that, it should hide all of the albums. I don't have a variable called albums here yet, so let's fix that. Okay, bring this higher. Okay, so for albums, I'm going to grab that variable here. Okay. Good. Now it hides them, but now I need to turn the one on that's related to the one I clicked. Okay, so the next step is to turn the one on that I clicked on. Now that's a little bit tricky here because now what I'm after here is I have the name of the album, so let's see. No, I just need one, so I don't use all. Query selector. And the one I'm after is actually up here, this ID, right? Query selector ID. So that should give me access to that particular div, and now I want to turn it on. So dot class list dot remove. In the past, up here to hide it, I added the hide class, and now I want to remove that. So dot remove, and the class I'm going to remove is hide. Okay, let's try it. Good, excellent. So now I'm hiding all of them, but then when I click on it, it turns the one on that I clicked on. That looks pretty good. Let's save that here.